once again, McGirt, what that means is since 1907, state prosecutors have handled cases involving any citizen. Now state prosecutors cannot handle a single case if it involves a Native American, suspect or victim. We are out of that game.
So Steve, are you saying that McGirt isn't only the major crimes, as they said, but it's actually affecting all crimes?
It's all crimes. It's all crimes. Any crime. Traffic, DUI, right? The tribes can only handle cases involving suspects who are Native Americans.
If I don't have anything else that I need to talk about, then I'm just going to go ahead and bring Steve up because we always enjoy hearing what Steve has to say. I'm sure there's lots going on that he can tell us about, and he can kind of update us on what's going on with McGirt and the Attorney General's case against the McGirt decision. And look, he's smiling. Now, are you up for re-election next year? Okay, so I think he's done a great job. What do you guys? So, you want to come on up here? He's our county district attorney, and you've done phenomenal work, and we appreciate you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, so I need to ask you before I even start talking. Have you guys ever seen me do my Star Spangled speech talk? Has anybody heard me do that?
I don't mind hearing it.
I'm gonna. So it just honors me so much.
Is that what you said?
Yeah. No, it honors me so much when I come to clubs where they begin their meetings by doing the Pledge of Allegiance. And I remember I was at an event probably early on when I was first campaigning to become DA and had gone and we were all saying the Pledge of Allegiance. And then I got to think, they had somebody that sang the Star Spangled Banner. And when we got to that part of "O'er the Ramparts We Watched," it hit me, I didn't know what a rampart is. And so I imagine there may be a couple of you in here who know that, but how many people, just raise your hand if you know what a rampart is? All right, I see 4 people. Yes, sir. What's a rampart?
It's like a barrier.
Yes. So it's kind of the external perimeter of a fortress. So I want to walk with you a little bit about some of the research I did on the Star Spangled Banner, and it'll give you some insight the next time you sing that song. And it's a pretty heroic event. So back in the War of 1812, you have to go back in time to think about what was happening at that moment in time. We had just secured our independence. We declared it in 1776. We secured it essentially in 1780, I think. And so in 1812-ish, that period of time, if you look at our country, we were an infant. Literally. On the world stage, we were an infant. We had understood pretty importantly what liberty and freedom had meant, and yet England had decided that what they had lost was worth retaking. And so once again, we were confronted with this largest military force on the planet at the time. And their goal was to take back what they had. So thinking about how back then, generations were pretty short, from 1780 to 1800 is 20 years. You add on another 10 or 12 years, you've got maybe people who are in their 30s, basically in the prime of their life, who didn't know anything about the Revolutionary War other than their mom and dad's stories. Much like my youngest daughter, who only was born when 9/11 happened but didn't really know it. that's hard for the younger generation to appreciate what we experienced. So a country in its infancy and working on expansion, obviously westward with the acquisition of the Louisiana Purchase, and now here we have the British once again come knocking on our doors. The British had already sacked Washington, D.C., so our nation's capital had been burned. They were working on the next major objective, which was to end the war. It was taking over Baltimore at that time, which was a vital seaport and a central hub to be able to wipe out the backside of our republic. So at that time, Colonel, I think it's Colonel George Armstead, not a general, I think he was a lieutenant colonel, had been tasked with defending Fort McHenry, which sat at the mouth of Baltimore. So think about what that challenge had to have been like for somebody who had been told or already knew up to that point. We've already had Washington, D.C. overrun. They're working their way down south, and of course, thank God for Andrew Jackson in New Orleans. But here was really where the battle was going to be fought. The backdrop, obviously, is he's been told you can't let them in. You cannot let them in. If they get past you and they control this port, then they're going to run down the backside of our spine and they're going to wipe us out. So he enlisted the assistance of a lady named Mary Pickersgill. And Mary Pickersgill and her daughter created the Star-Spangled Banner. And I don't know if you've ever seen it. When I grew up back in the I graduated high school in 1980, so there was a point in time in the 70s where the restoration of the Star-Spangled Banner was going on. You may remember that. It had fallen into, I don't know where they were storing it, but it was apparently not stored very well, and so there was this Herculean effort to try and restore this flag just so it wouldn't disintegrate anymore. It was at that time most of the country got to see the sheer size of that flag. I wish I had my...
Huge, yeah. It's
Yeah.
huge. It's in
What's hanging in the Smithsonian?
It is in
Yeah.
the Smithsonian.
And so it's there, but I mean, it's, I would almost say, larger than this room. The most equivalent thing I guess I could say is when we drive down I-44 past that car dealership, and you see that gargantuan flag, that seems to me at least to be somewhat the equivalent. But there are some older pictures of the Star-Spangled Banner hanging off of the side of a building, and you could literally see some of the damage that flag had sustained during the battle. For a mother and her daughter to be tasked with creating such a immense flag had to have been an overwhelming task, and yet they were able to accomplish it. But what was the point? Why did we need such a large flag to fly over Fort McHenry? My thoughts are that actually I almost think he was a lieutenant, maybe not, but Armstead, I think he wanted the British to see that first. So if you've ever sailed or gone on a cruise or been someplace out on an open sea, what you see on the horizon is just water, right? And back in those days, in those ships, they had what they had called the crow's nest. I mean, they put a guy literally at the top of the ship to be the spotter for anything downrange. The sooner you saw land, the sooner you know where you needed to guide your ship, or the sooner you saw a speck on the horizon, the sooner you realized friend or foe, and you could prepare your crew in some semblance of time. And my belief is that Armstead knew that and wanted the British to know where the fight needed to take place, which is somewhat a statement of courage. It's like, okay, I know you're going to bring every last ounce of military fighting force, and we're not afraid of you. If you want to know where the fight is, the fight's going to be right here. And I think he was delivering really a message to the British of, this ain't the same group of folks you were fighting in the Revolutionary War. We're a little bit more prepared, but we're also not afraid of you. So if you're hunting on your sea and you're looking out over the horizon, it had to have been somewhat, I almost think, daunting to the British to realize, well, that's something. What is that? Holy mackerel! That's a huge American flag. So. Obviously, the British are coming in, and at that time, Francis Scott Key, who's the author of the Star-Spangled Banner, it was a poem, he was a part of a contingent of individuals who were tasked with seeing if we could do some kind of prisoner exchange with the British. And obviously we had some American soldiers who were captives, and we were trying to work some kind of deal. That's how they used to do that back in the day. Is you got some of our guys, we got some of yours, can we exchange? So his impression was he was going to go out and get on the ship and then work this negotiation out. It was only at that time that when he got on that ship that he realized the enormity of the fleet that was getting ready to come in. And as he said, hey, we'd like to work this discussion about exchanging prisoners, legend has it the line was, well, sure, you'll be able to have your prisoners, but by tomorrow you'll be our subjects. So it really wasn't, according to the British, a prisoner exchange as much as, you'll get your people back, but you'll now be subject to the British Empire again. And so think about that perspective for Francis Scott Key as he's sitting on that ship in the harbor of Baltimore looking at Fort McHenry, which is being defended, I think, maybe by 1,000 soldiers. Things that you don't know and which are not talked about in the battle for Fort McHenry and the battle for Baltimore is that there were women within that fortress who were ferrying back and forth the munitions to the soldiers who were trying to respond as best they could to this massive British fleet. What you don't hear, and this has always been one of those things that has frustrated me when I have seen, Colin Kaepernick, the guy that would, wants to kneel rather than stand in allegiance to the flag. There was an African-American soldier named William Williams who literally fought and died on behalf of that flag for the liberty of this country that Mr. Kaepernick enjoys the freedoms that he has. It just seems like such a lack of understanding of history to appreciate, literally, people fought and died for your freedom. So anyway, back to the story. So Francis Scott Key is literally sitting out on this boat, and now the story kind of makes a little bit more sense for me about the ramparts thing. If you're sitting in any boat anywhere, we talk about being at sea level, right? So, I don't know what Tulsa is, but we're some number of feet above sea level, right? Sea level is presumed to be the lowest point. So when you're sitting on a ship in a harbor, you're presumably at a lower point, and there is Fort McHenry somewhat above you. So I'm going to kind of walk you through, let me get there. I just had it. All right, so here we go. This is how our national anthem begins, right? Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light. Okay, so what is that doing for you? That's framing for us as we're singing this song a perspective in time known to Francis Scott Key. It's dawn. You all got here maybe as the sun was starting to rise above the horizon. So he's saying to all of us, so say, can you see by this early light? And if you think about it, back then, there is no such thing as electricity. We are blessed that we can walk into a restaurant or into our homes and we could look at things and flip on the lights as we will. But back in 1812, at the time of this battle, their illumination was candle power or moonlight at nighttime. And so it's pretty dark there for them to see what's going on. What so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming. So Now we're bookended, right? Can you see this morning what we saw at twilight's last gleaming as the sun is totally setting down and there's really not much more illumination in the sky? Whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, right? So he's looking at that massive flag that Mary Pickersgill and her daughter had put together, right? And he's describing it in its gargantuan size. Or the ramparts, right? Over that exterior berm fortress around Fort McHenry, there's this thing that they had to literally look over, sitting at sea level. They're looking up over that rampart. Here we go. Let's see, my phone is changing away. All right, or the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. So last night, sun's going down, big bursting flag gallantly streaming, and we don't know what's going on. And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. So I don't recall the exact number of rockets and shells and bombs that were lobbed on the fort, but my recollection is that it was roughly 1 per minute. And the question I often ask people is, could you do that? One, know that the largest military force in the world is coming, and 2, you have basically said the fight is here, and 3, now you're in the midst of the fight, and every minute something is exploding or going over your head, and your job is to just hold the line. And in many of the movies we have watched, the significance is keep the flag up, right? It's a rallying point. And so for Francis Scott Key, as he is sitting in that harbor, along with all those American prisoners who are below board, all they're doing is trying to say, is the flag up? Is the flag up? What's the status of our troops, right? Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave, right? At dawn's early light, oh, say that just the wonderment and the fulfillment of a desire to say, you know, can you hang on, guys? Can you fight this fight? Or the land of the free and the home of the brave. What a great statement for us to adopt as citizens of this country and say, well, that's the anthem we want to fight for, or that's the anthem we want to stand for. That's what whom we are. In our infancy, we still were willing, without really knowing much about the Revolutionary War. Most of the fighters of the Revolutionary War were probably in retirement age, and they're not going to be manning the fort. So it was their sons and their daughters who were in this location fighting for something that they didn't. I'm sure they appreciated it, but probably they once again renewed the idea that we're going to fight this fight. So that was blood spilled on our borders once again, in order to preserve freedom. You know, as I move forward and I'm talk about what we as Americans encounter, we have fought many great battles on foreign shores. And the illustration in my talk that I've given on the flag is, I ask about the story of Bastogne, which is the Battle of the Bulge, right? And there's such a wonderful story about the general who was tasked with defending Bastogne. I think it was I think it's 101st Airborne. They're surrounded by a massive German army. It's the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans are breaking out, and Bastogne is on the hub of a wheel of multiple roads leading to places that the Germans had to get to. They had to take over Bastogne to run to Antwerp to capture the seaport. They had to. It would have literally broken our back for a period of time if they could have captured Bastogne. And so here they are, literally surrounded on foreign soil. And now we Americans are shedding our blood on behalf of freedom and liberty abroad. See, that's why we are such an attractive country, is people know how important liberty is. They know that we're willing to go to foreign shores to fight even for the liberty of other people. And the German commander had essentially dispatched a letter to the commander of the American garrison, basically said, listen, you're surrounded and this is going to be a slaughter fest, and The blood of your soldiers is going to be on your hands, but also every man, woman, and child that lives in this town will be on your hands. You need to surrender. And I'm sure some of you all know his response. What was that? Nuts, right? Which is polite for the finger, the middle finger, right? And for him to have done that and say, we're going to fight for something beyond us. We're fighting for freedom and liberty. So I try and remind folks, and you all, this is preaching to the choir, but our law enforcement is under so much pressure and under so frequent of an attack. And what do they do every morning but get out of their bed, get into their uniform, go to their car, kiss their wife or their husband goodbye, hug their children, and they don't know if they're coming back home tonight. And they have no clue whether or not they're going to be able to, or what they're going to encounter, but they're choosing by their volunteerism, and that's what it is. Nobody would take that. Anybody in here a former police officer, right? The things those ladies and gentlemen deal with on a daily basis, it is some of the most emotionally difficult and challenging circumstances, whether you're dealing with somebody who's mentally ill, or you're dealing with somebody who has no respect for the law, somebody who will urinate or defecate in your patrol unit or try and strike you, or who has victimized a child or a woman in a domestic violence situation. Those officers have to, on a daily basis, be professional and then have people challenge their integrity. I don't know what dollar amount I'd be willing to accept to pay me to do that job, but it is incredibly a great service to our community. As a Catholic, that's one of the things I believe very much more than anything else is, and my wife doesn't like it when I say this, but I've come to the conclusion that, if you really believe like I do that there's a better spot than this existence we have here, that there's a place to go to and it's heaven, that isn't something that's just handed to you. I don't think you can sit on a couch and eat Cheetos and say, well, I didn't do anything bad, so walk me in, I'm not bad. I think we have to serve one another. And so I've told my wife, I said, I think the clue is we need to be exhausted by the moment we breathe our last breath. Because I think that's what God expects us to be doing is you shouldn't be sitting back at whatever your condition is in life, whatever age you are in life. Whatever your circumstances are in life, you can always figure a way to figure out how to serve your fellow man. And one of the better illustrations I had heard was one of my priests was talking with a lady who had been stricken with cancer, and it was obviously going to be a terminal condition. And she felt so bad about, there's so many more things that I wish I could have done or could, to contribute. And the priest said to her, and I think it's a good comment, he says, you still can do things. Even in your terminal condition where you can't get out of your bed or whatever, in these last few months of your life, you can pray for other people. And for her, she repeated that story to our family was, I made it all about me, and she said, I realized it wasn't all about me. I can do other things for other people. So the power of prayer is important. People may not hear your prayer, but your prayer does intercede on their behalf. So thank you for the opportunity to talk with you. Be glad to share some things, and I think I'm going to take the Kevin Hearn approach, which is you hit me with questions and I'll respond because your interests are probably so much more important than mine. Yes, ma'am.
What do we do to help you?
If you're talking about just generally the district attorney's office or law enforcement in general, one is that, and I know Chief Wendell Franklin or Vic Regalado would tell you this oftentimes, if you just see somebody in uniform, and I know you already do this, is just say, hey, appreciate what you're doing. Words probably have more value than compensation in this day and age.
Why does it take so long for someone to get in front of the judge? And, why does it take so long?
Yep.
Why does it take so long for someone to get their supposed speedy trial, and they're set in jail for a month or two before they get their first. I don't understand that, because in other counties that doesn't happen.
Okay, well, yes and no. Yes and no. All right, so the concept of speedy trial is built into the Eighth Amendment. We do afford those people rights. When the pandemic began, just a little bit before that, Tulsa County, remember when these folks came from out of state and they said, we want to help you do a better job here in Oklahoma, and we'd love to be able to show you how to do things the New York way. And so they came in and they said, if you just let us look at your data and whatever, we'll provide you a report that'll give you some points that you can start working on in your criminal justice process, whether it's jail or pretrial detention, all those things. So obviously folks had turned over the access to some of that information so they could start doing what we couldn't afford to do, and it was helpful. But interestingly enough, after all that information was turned over and a report had been generated, we were then on the receiving end of a class action lawsuit trying to challenge how we were handling people who had been arrested and were being held on pretrial detention issues. So out of response essentially to that lawsuit, we then did start doing an examination of, all right, well, how are we handling people who are arrested? It was an efficient operation, but we figured out maybe we can even be quicker about it. So
The pandemic then had an effect on that.
Well, actually, yes, because my office had already been prepared to go remote. I acquired a database that enabled me to send some of a lot of my folks home, and they could work remotely. But we created a daily bond docket, which didn't exist before. And so somebody who is arrested last night will be on a TV this morning at 9:30 or so, and we run through that docket till about 12. And so we may have anywhere from 20 to 40 people who are maybe arrested in the Tulsa area for any variety of crimes. We have preset guides for bond. Some people waive that hearing. Some people, they want to talk with the judge. The court appoints the public defender's office for the limited purpose of talking about bond. And then we have a conversation about what are the facts in the arrest. Oftentimes I don't even have anywhere close to full reports. All I have is the probable cause affidavit, which might be 2 or 3 sentences. And then it's a great challenge to me to at least inform the court, here's what the alleged crime is, here's what some of the probable cause facts are, and here's some of the history, and then the court sets a bond. So people are being seen immediately.
Was this so-called pandemic is interfering with our rights.
Yeah, so I'm working my way there. I'm working my way there, right? So I'm giving you one example, right? So it is accelerated. But, you talk about other counties. I've worked up in Washington County. I worked up in Nowata County, and obviously it's smaller, but you can do things quicker in smaller counties because you have easier access. If you want faster access, then find a way to pay more money to hire more judges. Oklahoma, I will tell you, Oklahoma runs 1.5 to 2 times less than any other jurisdiction I have encountered in funding their public safety folks in the court system. I pay 1.5 to 2 times less money for my prosecutors than somebody in Kansas or in Texas or in Arkansas or in New York. I have 1.5 to 2 times less staff than most of these other jurisdictions. So when the Bronx comes in and says, hey, here's how you should do your operation, I ask them, well, tell me what your total staff is. Out of their total staff, they've got a population of 3 million people, right? We've got maybe close to 700,000, right? So I ask them, they've got 2.1 million people, and we've got about 700,000. So they're by a factor of 7 greater than me, or 3, by a factor of 3 greater than me. Their attorneys in their office, they have 600 attorneys. All right. If we were to use that premise that people are people and crime is crime and victims are victims, then I should have 200 attorneys in my office. I have 50. 50.
So you're working very.
We are in triage mode, and that is the way it works in Oklahoma courts. And unfortunately, the drivers, which are Oklahoma City and Tulsa, at some point we're going to have a conversation with our legislature to say you need to increase the funding, because we're the drivers of most crime and we're the drivers of most of the economy for the rest of the state. And we need to be treated like that. So we're moving pretty quickly. The pandemic actually helped us try cases faster. We're actually getting cases now quicker to court because we were able to weed out the ones we didn't want to try, and we pick the ones that are really important. So we're getting cases roughly to trial within a year, which is pretty good time for Tulsa County. Yes, ma'am.
Hang on just a second.
Yep.
Steve, I was looking at the when they set the dates for the executions again. Okay, and most of those happened, the crimes happened in the 90s, I believe, and some in the 2000s, but one was in 1985.
Yep.
Why did we have, I know the pandemic put some off, but why would we have somebody that long?
Well, so if you look at some of those cases, they're not all those. I've got a guy down there right now, Clarence Good. Of course, you know, he was a triple homicide purveyor of death, Owasso, killed a mother, her boyfriend, and the mother's 10-year-old daughter in their sleep. Prosecuted that back in the mid-2000s. It's been, you know, roughly 15 years, and he's literally right at the end of his appeal process. McGirt happened, and that stalled things. He claimed that he was a member of the Choctaw tribe. You know, he's clearly an African-American looking person, but he had documentation that he was a member of the Choctaw tribe. Fortunately, the Court of Criminal Appeals came out with a recent decision that said, no, you can't go back and do revisionist history. We're probably going to have to litigate that, and I'm confident he's going to litigate that. He's going to try and challenge that decision all the way up to the Supreme Court. Some of those cases that are as distant back as the 80s, if you remember the Charlie Mitchell's murders, Houchin and I can't remember the other victim. You know, they had been kidnapped from the parking lot of Charlie Mitchell's off of 21st Street, put in the back seat or in the trunk of the car, taken to Creek County, car lit on fire. They were burned to death inside that. So those two guys were tried 3 separate times. You know, they found guilty, up to the Court of Criminal Appeals, reversed, bring it back, try it again, all the way up to Court of Criminal Appeals, reversed, bring it back, try it the third time, get it all the way up to the Court of Criminal Appeals. So sometimes some of those cases, you know, they don't even get to the track of going all the way to the Supreme Court on those, you know, trying to get those stays of execution. So that's why you have a bit of a disparity in the number, in the ages of certain cases. But it's frustrating to me that Mr. Good's case has taken roughly 15 years. So I've got one right back here, and then we'll work our way around.
I just want to say that it's not always bad that they have to stay in jail. I mean, they get cleaned up. We go in, up until the pandemic, my son, I buy the Bibles, and he goes in and has Celebrate Recovery with some of them. We're now working with them in the church, and they've cleaned up. They're wonderful citizens now. So, but had they gotten out, do you think they would have come to Celebrate Recovery? Right. But we got them. They were able to stay long enough that they got cleaned up, and we were able to minister to them.
So I will tell you something that's interesting. It's kind of a little bit related to what you're talking about. So I was appointed by Governor Fallin and then reappointed by Governor Stitt to the Criminal Justice Reclassification Coordinating Council. That was started in 2018, and the whole concept was to look at Oklahoma's criminal justice system and make some recommendations as to whether or not we ought to reclassify crimes and figure out if we can deal with our prison population. We finally adopted a package that we're going to formally present to the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, and to the Governor. We've come up with a kind of a reclassification, different type of grid system. It is revenue neutral, actually even almost somewhat less revenue if it plays out that people get sentenced according to where they're at. But at that meeting we had yesterday, where we adopted this, and this is people from all segments of Oklahoma. We've had the Department of Mental Health on there. We got Department of Corrections. We got OSBI. We've got prosecutors. We got public defenders. Bob Ravitz, who's the chief public defender in Oklahoma County, was one of the principals in helping develop this package. Our prison population today, without even this thing being passed, is as low as it was in 2001. That's where we're at. So when you hear this, oh, we have the highest incarceration rate or whatever, you need to start questioning that. That's too easy to throw that out there, and nobody's saying our prison population is as low as it was in 2001. In the meantime, our population has gone up. So I don't know where that sweet spot is with regard to incarceration, but for the most part, most crimes, unless it's a serious violent felony, are eligible for an automatic parole review within 25% of their sentence. So if you got a 20-year sentence, you're coming up before the Pardon and Parole Board automatically at 5 years. And a lot of the people, unless there's some type of protest, you may only do 5 years if you get your parole at that hearing. So, I think we're fine-tuning and tweaking the system and working towards it. But we are going to have a statement that will be attached to this package that the governor will get and the legislature will get, and it'll be up to your point. Oklahomans have been promised too long and never delivered a package that involves substantive counseling and treatment for the people who are entering the criminal justice process. We were promised that Proposition 780, which made every single drug possession case a perpetual misdemeanor, that there was going to be such an enormous cost savings that under Proposition 781, that great huge pot of gold was going to be rededicated towards treatment facilities in every jurisdiction around the state of Oklahoma. I've yet to see one penny as a result of that ridiculous proposal, because we all knew that was not going to happen. When you go to the Department of Corrections right now for a sex crime, you are not getting counseling or treatment for sexual offending, right? I mean, those are some of the worst people in society. We are warehousing them, and at some point they're going to get out. And when they get out, I mean, what have they learned other than maybe how not to get caught the next time? But they haven't. Nobody's addressed their sexual deviancies. We have such a great number of people who have drug and alcohol addiction problems that fuel crime in our communities. We don't have adequate resources to divert those people into treatment programs. There is no such thing as mandatory treatment in Oklahoma. There's no such thing.
There's
I
no place
cannot
to
order.
send them. I mean,
Right.
I mean, I have 3 homes for women, and there's times when we need to get somebody cleaned up, and
Yep, it
there's
doesn't
no
exist.
place to go.
It doesn't exist. So we have a draft of a statement that says to the legislature, essentially, don't pass this new package of how we're reclassifying crimes without dedicating the resources necessary for treatment, counseling, and diversion. So when we do have somebody who keeps on being a repeat offender and they're in the court system, one of the complaints is, well, don't warehouse them into the Department of Corrections. Well, then the legislature ought to create what I call intermediate sanction facilities, which is a facility that you can now court order somebody who's on probation and they're testing hot for methamphetamine or heroin or whatever it is. It's like you're going into a treatment program and you can't get out until you complete the program satisfactorily. That needs to be created. Texas has something like that. Other jurisdictions have something like that. But that takes our legislature stop spending on things that aren't helping and start spending on the things that will help our state 5, 10, 15 years into the future. So we're pushing hard towards the mental health. You can see it walking our streets. We don't have enough resources to provide them with a way to level out or get their medications and what have you. We have abandoned, in many respects, some of the people who are necessary wards to the system. I hate to say it. I mean, I'd like to think that everybody grew up like I did, but there's some folks that they're dependent on their community, and we're their community, and we need to make sure we have the resources available. Vic Regalado will tell you this, that he's done research, and he says there are less beds in Oklahoma now for the mentally ill than there were back in the 60s. Right, so we've got to course correct that, and that'll be a part of this package. So we're working on it,
Okay,
and thank
great.
you. Great point. Another, I want to give them a little bit of opportunity. Yeah, back there.
Is the OIM history something we won't see again? See the threat of again?
All right, I'm sorry. Sometimes I'm not good on abbreviations. Oh, ever be vigilant. Ever be vigilant, folks.
I think that's going to depend on your city council.
Yeah. I, as a prosecutor and working my way up through the system, work different supervisory positions in my office. And so you see things that you know will work or don't work just from your experience. And I'm confident all of you have had that same kind of experience until you get to a level where you can actually be the boss guy. And so I've had a lot of people like, man, you've got some great ideas, wonderful ideas. These are such new and profound ideas. And I've said, those are ideas I had 15 years ago, but I couldn't get anybody to listen to me, right? And so I have made it a point when I'm bringing people into my office. I said, I am hiring you to do a job, but I'm also hiring you to be a problem solver. I need you to be thinking how to solve problems on a daily basis. When I say ever be vigilant, what I'm saying is there are problems, right? People have frustrations with how certain things are being administered, and it's the duty and responsibility of the people we hired in these public oversight positions to make sure they police their own issues in such a way that the public doesn't have to question externally what's going on. And so, you know, it's our job, it's my job, and you should hold me or any other elected official accountable for how our operations run. But to me, it seems the solution is make sure you hire those people who see those problems internally and create systems in place that internally can course correct. When you create, right, that's what it's going to end up being, a bureaucratic oversight that has little, if any, internal understanding of operations, and then they come in starting to dictate how everybody else ought to operate. You know that's just going to be a train wreck into the future. So I say ever be vigilant and question the people who are running these operations, like my office, say, what are you doing about this particular issue and how are you going to resolve it? Sometimes we fail or we miss or we screw up, and we need to be told that we've screwed up. But I loathe the concept that we create these bureaucratic institutions that have little, if any, working person's knowledge, and then they bring in an external agenda that's politically motivated, and we're seeing that tear our country apart right now anyway. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we're hearing a lot of gang wars going on. Can you address that at all? And what can we do to help with that?
I'm very concerned about that. So our southern border, as you well know, is just an open track into our country. Mexico, for the most part, is not a sovereign nation that can run its own issues. I mean, they have areas of their country which are literally run by drug cartels. We're the biggest consumer of their products, and so while we are in the middle of trying to manage our southern border, which is poorly managed, they know how to. It's simple blocking and tackling, right? You know, we got all these Haitian immigrants. Well, while we're trying to spend all that time, they're running an end around over here and pouring fentanyl and heroin and methamphetamine. I mean, the old days, remember those old days? And I hate to say it, I don't even want to go back to the old days, but when meth was being manufactured, Here, you used to have people who would go to a farm and steal anhydrous ammonia, and they had these elaborate labs in barns and wherever, and you know, that was big stuff. And then they figured out that you can make meth in a pop bottle. We haven't had the meth pop bottle method, which was highly flammable. Remember when we had apartment fires and those kind of things? The only time I've had one of those within the last year was in a homeless camp along the river. So where's all our meth coming from? They're coming from manufacturing plants. I mean, literally a plant that's built and is exclusively designed to make methamphetamine on a mass production basis from Mexico. Or it's coming on containers from China in the form of fentanyl and heroin. And we have no way to secure that. And the people who run those operations are the gangs. And so I'm worried because McGirt, in essence, has created the opportunity for gangs to figure out how to victimize our public using Native Americans. Right now, there literally is not much of a juvenile system in federal court. So once again, McGirt, what that means is since 1907, state prosecutors have handled cases involving any citizen. Now state prosecutors cannot handle a single case if it involves a Native American, suspect or victim. We are out of that game. We held that line and did a great job in doing it. The feds, you know, they only would do anywhere from 200 to 300 in Northern District, 200 to 300 indictments a year. Well, the Northern District isn't Tulsa County. The Northern District is 17 counties, I think. 200 cases. I was doing anywhere from 5 to 7 or 6 to 8,000 felonies a year just in Tulsa County. So the federal government was focusing on major crimes. They did 3 murders in the last 20 years, right? And so now they're being overrun with major crimes. My concern is the things they would do for us would be target gangs, target the Aryan Brotherhood. Target gangs like the Crips and the Bloods and do these major interdictive attacks on these organizations. Now they're just trying to, it's whack-a-mole for them, and they're trying to put out all these little fires. I hope they're dedicating some resources to tackling the thing they've always been tackling, which was organized gangs. I don't know how they're doing it. And it's a good question, and people need to be focused, but they don't even have a juvenile system. So if you're an organized gang, what would you do, right? I can't prosecute a case involving a Native American kid, right? If you're an organized gang, and if there's literally little, if any, type of juvenile system, who would you be recruiting to do your lower level whatever, or do your shootings? You'd be recruiting Native American kids to do those types of crimes, even some of the violent crimes, because there's literally no accountability. And then after that, I've said this, anybody Native American in here? Okay. What kind of tag do you have on the back of your car? What? Okay. So you need to know this. Back when I grew up in high school, everybody had a gun rack in the back of their pickup truck, right? Can you tell me the last time you've seen a gun rack in the back of a pickup?
Isn't it prohibited?
No. You got a right to carry guns, right? Right? So why don't we have gun racks in the back of our trucks? Still right. Back then, when I first became a prosecutor, it was the advent of crack cocaine and then methamphetamine, you know. But the people who have drug addiction issues, it's not like they're holding down jobs and then, you know, going using their income to buy drugs. They steal stuff, and the easiest thing to sell is a gun. And so when you're walking through a parking lot and you see a gun rack, you're like, well, there's a gun. That's pretty easy. Knock out the window and take it. Then they started figuring out, why am I breaking out the window of this truck? I'll just follow that to the house, because if he's got a gun in his truck, he's probably got a gun in his house. And so people were being victimized. Second Amendment folks were being victimized, and they were advertising that, hey, I got guns. We used to see a long time. Like, ask me about my Smith & Wesson. I mean, those are fun little stickers in the back of cars. I don't see hardly any of those because you're essentially saying, come break into my car, right? Come follow me my house. Well, we don't have that anymore, but what is the one thing that advertises, hey, I'm a willing victim? I tell folks that those tribal tags are an indicator to people who are the criminal element. Once again, one more time. I can't prosecute a case involving a Native American suspect or victim. The tribes cannot prosecute a case involving a non-Native American suspect. So when you hear that the Creeks or the Cherokees or the Choctaws are setting up their courts, the only cases that they are handling is where a tribal citizen is alleged to have committed the crime, other than very narrow instances of domestic violence. They do have the ability to handle a case where a non-Native American is victimizing a Native American citizen. So, you're a Native American, your car gets broken into and it gets looted, or your house gets broken into and it gets looted. For the first time ever in Oklahoma, when law enforcement show up or talk with you, the first question they're going to ask you is a race-based question. Are you a Native American? And if you say, yes, I am, the police, the Tulsa police, have been cross-deputized, but they're probably going to say, well, I'll tell you what, I'll try and get a hold of somebody from the FBI or ATF or somebody to come out here. We don't have a community of federal agents running around.
So, Steve, are you saying that McGirt isn't only the major crimes, as they said, but it's actually affecting all crimes?
It's all crimes. It's all crimes. Any crime. Traffic, DUI, right? The tribes can only handle cases involving suspects who are Native Americans. And they have limitations by law as to how much time they can get. So if a Native American committed murder in the first degree, killed one person, and the federal government decided we're not going to prosecute that case, they could do that. The Native tribe could do that, but their maximum punishment for murder in first degree is 3 years. 3 years. Right? Now, they'll talk about, well, we can stack and add all the way up to 9 years. Well, I'm like, okay, well, what's the difference between 3 and 9 years for first-degree murder where you're using a firearm, right? So the federal government has had to take on the bulk of those major crimes, and because they're taking on those major crimes, they are not looking at burglaries. They're not looking at auto theft. They'll receive those. And I tell citizens, you need to ask your folks the question. It's like, okay, great. I know you're telling me you're doing it. What's the status of the case? My car just got broken into. What's the status? It went up to you all. What did you all do with it? Well, we've got it. We're reviewing it, right? No, I don't want to hear that answer. I want to know when's it going to be decided? I have high doubts that those kind of cases are ever going to be filed in the federal system. If they were to refer them to the tribes, I can already tell you that's a non-deal because the tribe has no jurisdiction over that, because it's a white dude or a black dude or a Hispanic dude or a Chinese dude who broke into your car. You are being victimized and are a target for victimization. So I encourage people who are Native Americans. I don't know if you saw the forum that we had, that Governor Stitt had. The whole point of that forum, where it was just this huge shouting fest. They had a lot of tribal folks, and they were so angry at Governor Stitt. But the whole point of that forum was to educate Native Americans. You are at higher risk now because of McGirt than you ever were before McGirt. And we're trying to illustrate that, and we're trying to get the AG to find us a case that we can elevate back up to the Supreme Court so they can look at that impact, because I think it was, I can't imagine that they could appreciate that by that decision that they were wanting to have Native Americans be further victimized than any other segment of the population. It's in my opinion, shameful.
Are the tribes telling their people? I'm sorry, I know that, but I mean, just on this, are the tribes letting their people know that they're at a disadvantage now?
And I get yelled at. So I grew up in Missouri, right? Harry Truman was the president from Missouri, and one of my absolute favorite quotes is a Harry Truman quote, right? Back in the day, they used to say, "Give him hell, Harry." He followed up on this. He says, people say, "Hey, give them hell, Harry. He says, I don't give people hell. I tell them the truth and they think it's hell, right? So I mean, when I tell people who are tribal members, this is true, you know, the folks who are on the receiving end of your rightful, hey, what's going on with this, they don't like that heat. But that's a heat that they now have, right? And they're going to have to figure out how to make that work. So McGirt is never going to be resolved unless we have a Supreme Court modification of McGirt, or we get Congress to do something to fix it. And if you're in the Southern District of Idaho, do you care about anything that's going on the eastern half of Oklahoma? Heck no. Right? Make it relevant to me. I don't care about what your problem is in Oklahoma. So probably the quickest path to solving some of this issue is the United States Supreme Court. So,
Steve, how is it fair to me? I'm a non-Indian. Okay?
Yes.
What if an Indian steals my car and then that case has to go to Indian court? How are my rights protected?
That's the type of question. So my undergraduate degree is agriculture journalism. Went to the University of Missouri, right? Yeah, I know. But I was a journalist back in what I kind of say was the end of the golden age of journalism, where you actually had journalists who knew how to investigate. Right now, what happens is, I'm telling you this, they will walk up to me, and it's not their fault because they've not been educated on it, but they'll just say, hey, Steve, tell me about this case. Right? They don't have any facts or information about the case to ask me probing, detailed, get down below the surface and let's figure out what's really going. They ask me to tell them something so they can put something up on the news for their 2-minute segment, right? That's not journalism. So we got to figure out who the real journalists are out there who would investigate this. So I will give you a good example. I contacted the Broken Arrow Police Department, the Tulsa Police Department, and the Wausau Police Department. I asked them one simple question. How many of your officers have been subpoenaed to handle a case in Tahlequah or in Okmulgee? Tulsa Police Department yesterday informed me. They sent out a request to all their officers and said, who here has been requested to respond and testify on a case in which you made an arrest for whatever crime it was in any of these jurisdictions? One subpoena. And we're talking about thousands of cases now. Thousands of cases. How in the world can a judge or a prosecutor know what is going on with the case unless they're actually talking with the police officer to say, here's what I saw, here's what I did? What is going on in those cases? We have no idea. I know there's the Cherokees, God love them, are filing some of these cases, but the officers are reporting back to me that they're not being summoned to court to testify about what's going on. So who's running the ship there, right? Is it the defendant who's running the ship, or is it the prosecutor who's running the ship, right? And how do victims get their property restored back to them? Who's collecting restitution, right? In Oklahoma, we have laws governing restitution. In Oklahoma, we have Marcy's Law, which is a constitutional amendment. The tribes, I don't know whether they've ever adopted a victims' rights bill or legislation to mandate that you have an absolute right to be present in a hearing and know what's going on. That's a question a journalist ought to be asking, and that's a question a journalist ought to be putting out to the public so that the public can be better educated, and that's how laws get changed.
Can citizens request for their rights the body cam coverage of the event?
So if outside of Indians or whatever, let's just say just body-worn cameras. Oklahoma is one of the most liberal open records states in the country, just because that's who we are. If it's a matter that's pending or under investigation, a lot of that stuff is not going to be released, but there are many instances in which body-worn camera information is being released. Most of the time it's through a news media outlet that, we had a high-speed pursuit or whatever that was, and they say, hey, we want that released. So you can make an open records request, but it would be dependent on the status of the case. If it's still a matter that's an ongoing.
Possible that the citizen could get that.
Right. If it's been done, but I'm telling you, if your car was broken,
That they all wear body cams then, shouldn't they?
well, except for, when do you turn on the body worn camera, right? I mean, that's
They should be required to turn it on.
okay. Do you want to pay for that?
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, be ready for a huge bill because the size of a server
Our son can
to
get
store.
we can get cams for our house for inexpensive.
Storage. Storage.
The video.
The storage is what costs.
Storage.
Storage is what costs.
Right. I mean, you're talking millions of dollars. If you talk, every officer turns it on from the moment he puts his uniform on until he gets out of his car and parks it, and then storing all that information. You're talking about millions of dollars.
Truth, though, sometimes.
I'd love to have it, but you better pay for it, right? I'd love to have it.
One last follow-up, and this will be it. But curious because McGirt was supposed to be limited. It's now all over the place. Who has made that decision? Where's that come from? Just so we can understand.
So McGirt, good question. He almost sounds like a lawyer. McGirt,
journalist.
There we go. McGirt was a Supreme Court decision that is, in its own application, limited to criminal matters, and yet it's being applied beyond criminal matters. So I don't know the name of the power plant that's down in Broken Arrow, but that power plant has back earlier this year sent a notice that said they were refusing to pay the state of Oklahoma whatever taxes because of McGirt, right? McGirt is inapplicable, but it's being used as a platform. Even more alarming is the Interior Affairs for the United States Bureau of Interior Affairs for the U.S. government used McGirt as a authorization to take over regulatory oversight of some coal mining operation somewhere in Oklahoma. And so your governor right now is involved in some fairly significant, and your attorney general is involved in some fairly heavy litigation to try and rebut this, what I call the attempt to take control of our state. Governor Stitt says it's an existential threat to the sovereignty of the state of Oklahoma. No other state in the country is under the threat that Oklahoma is in. And I've often said, it's frustrating to me, David, I've often felt that Oklahoma, for some crazy reason, people on the left coasts and the east coast, wherever they are, seem to think that Oklahoma is a social welfare experiment. And so some of the most radical ideas get introduced here because apparently our citizens are disposable. What happens? So a few Oklahomans die here or there. At least it's not a New Yorker or somebody from California. And so you get these crazy concepts that are coming in, and they love to watch them play out for Oklahomans, and then they learn from everything that happens here and then try and apply them in other jurisdictions. So what's happening is they're watching how McGirt is being litigated and whether it can be expanded. I know there are plenty of folks out there that are saying legally there's no way that it could be applied in the civil realm. Well, I was told when I went to Washington, D.C. and talked with our federal congressional delegation to include Kevin Hearn. Now, he didn't say this, he understood it. But I said, I'm concerned that this thing is going to go against the state of Oklahoma. You're overthinking that, Steve. Don't worry about that. Everything's going to be fine. McGirt, we don't think the Supreme Court's going to decide the way they do. And even if they do, we've got a quick fix solution. Well, it's been over a year, and I have yet to see the quick fix solution. So,
another thing, and I'm gonna kind of help you wrap it up real quick. There are groups and organizations.
I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to wrap it up. I enjoy that.
And individuals that are out there that are looking for the loopholes. They're looking for ways that they can make things just like when he said that they expanded it. It got beyond just the criminal. Now you're into civil and you're into all this other stuff. There are people out there that look at these laws and will find the loopholes so that they can then take advantage of it. And while we're sitting here, not in McGirt, but in other things, we think, oh, this is a good idea. You know, this sounds like a good idea. And then once it comes into play, you see what the back message is and what the underlying intent was for that bill to be passed and why they were asking for it. So we have to be very careful about some of these bills and things that we want to get behind, because they may sound pretty on the outside, but once you get into the nuts and bolts of it, it's not good for Oklahoma.
Yeah, so I often say, my lesson, of course, I've been doing this for 30 some odd years, but I learned it on the largest scale when I went to D.C. If you ever see somebody say to you, and they do this, don't worry about it. It's going to be okay.
Oh no, it's
that's the number one.
We've got it under control.
Right, that's the number one warning sign. That's the number one warning sign for you to go, I'm not quite so sure I believe that. Yep. So.
Well, and that's what a lot of politicians will do. How often have you talked to a politician where first off, we think that they know more than we do, which is a wrong thought altogether, because they don't necessarily know more than we do. Oftentimes, we're the ones that have to educate them. Okay. But then you go in and you want to talk about something, and their attitude is, it's okay, honey. We got it under control. Don't you worry. You just go on home, take care of the household, and we got this taken care of.
Okay, I'm going.
So, but because we feel inferior, or we feel not able to be able to hold a detailed conversation regarding the situation, more than likely neither are they. That's their way of getting rid of you, get you on out their office so that they can go on and take care of their business. And listen, like I say, they don't know everything. Our elected officials do not know it all, and except for Steve, of course.
No. So but it's human nature, right?
Yeah.
It's human nature when somebody puts you on the spot and you don't know the answer, and you're in some position as a parent, right? I've had my kids ask me questions that I don't know the answer, and it's embarrassing not to be able to provide them an answer on something that is really important to her. And human nature, you don't want to admit ignorance, and you don't want to feel like you're less responsible or in control. And so that's the great struggle for all of us in our daily lives, is to be able to admit to my wife, you're right, I don't know the answer to that question, and I would be wrong to try and pretend like I do, right? That shows, in your own mind, you feel that shows weakness, but St. Paul speaks to this, right? He talks about his weakness is his power, right? When a government leader can acknowledge that they don't know the answer, what they're saying is, I work for you, so help me come up with that answer. The worst thing a leader can do is claim to know everything about everything, because then the public gets complacent and they think that, oh, well, he's got it all under control, or she's got it all under control. So I tell government leaders, embrace your weakness. It's scriptural. And it's okay to say you don't know the answer, because then you end up, like if I were to say I don't know the answer to this question, I've got 20 people that one of you all might have a better idea than I've got. So embracing weakness is a strength, and that's, I think, a good quality of leadership.
So before we say goodbye, can you give us an action item? Can you give us something that maybe we can do to help you, or to help in some other way within our community at this time?
You bet. My phone's ringing in my ear right now.
That's fine. I got you.
Hey, I'll call you right back. Yeah.
The mic didn't help at all.
If you got hearing aids, some of these things Bluetooth in, and so it's,
No, I get it.
So
is there an action item that you
I will
can
tell
give
you
us?
the number. We got so many crises, but
Let's not waste on.
but yeah, but I truly believe our refusal to embrace mental illness and help those people out needs to be corrected. I've met way too many people who have family members who have mental illness, and I get it. If you've never encountered mental illness, there's this weird stigma that surrounds it unless you've been in it. And it doesn't take too long to be in it to say, why was I so jacked up about the stigma of worrying about, oh, somebody knows my son or my daughter has this particular issue. We've got to figure out, and this is not an easy action item, but I'm saying the fact that we all see somebody down here on this corner hanging with a sign who's more than willing to try and collect money, that I'm confident that person has some type of mental illness. You can go.
Yep.
You can this big grove of trees that's back over here. You should get somebody to take a drone above that. That is a homeless encampment. There are people living in the woods out there, out of sight, out of mind. We can't tolerate that anymore. We've got to act more on behalf of our mentally ill population, because they are just as vulnerable as somebody in a nursing home or as a child in a bad environment. We gotta answer that problem. So I don't know if that's not really a specific action
Well,
item.
no,
It's a
I
big
mean,
one.
I just think that, we all come to these meetings and we get all this information, but I think that we've got to have something that we can do. What can we do to help correct things? What can we,
Do we need legislation that would enable us to force these?
Okay, so I've said this. I mean, it's irritated the tar out of me, right? We somehow figured out, let's give tax credits to people who build windmills on the western prairies of Oklahoma, and so now we've got a bazillion windmills out there. And I'm thinking, well, dadgummit, we have a paucity of available beds to stabilize these people, right? Well, okay, how about if you want to give a tax credit, give a tax credit to a hospital. The hospitals, all the private hospitals, shut down their psych wards because it was not profitable, right? It's expensive to treat the mentally ill. Could we find a way that we could help our community better by just saying, all right, if there's a way we want to give out tax credits, maybe that's something that would, help our local communities, something that would incentivize our hospitals to open up a couple rooms just so you could stabilize this guy. Because the net effect is this. A police officer who has to deal with somebody who's mentally ill, it's just not that officer. He or she's going to have to get another officer to help them. And then they haul them down to, if they have the time, to the hospital. And then they ask a doctor who's already overworked doing things in the ER to do a mental health evaluation to determine if they ought to be detained. And if they ought to be detained, then the officer has to haul them to some location and hope to find that there's a bed available. And sometimes they're driving all the way to Veneta or all the way to Oklahoma City. Think about the time spent and the resources spent to pull an officer out of line when he's got to cover this particular grid. So what we ended up seeing was, instead of, I don't want to say it's wasting, but it is. And instead of spending that amount of time going and dealing with this one individual, what you saw were officers, they would all see the mentally ill person commit a crime in their presence, and they'd arrest them and put them in the jail, and now they're back out on the street, and yet now we've got a mentally ill person in our jail we have to deal with.
Yeah, and that's what they're.
Don't we have a mentally ill pod up there?
There's a pod, but
That's
it
your
only holds
sheriff.
so
That's
many.
your sheriff. Your sheriff is law and order. He should not be a mental health whatever, right? So one of my ideas is, why can't we, and I'm suggesting this to the sheriff, I was like, maybe we ought to figure out that, I'm not a big fan of Department of Health in this area. I think they ought to have more
Neither
beds
are
available.
we.
They ought to have more beds available to us. So maybe what we ought to do is figure out a way to build some kind of a hybrid pod that the sheriff doesn't operate, but it does allow law enforcement to funnel these people in, and then we can screen them at that moment to say, that's a crime, we're going to run it over here, we're going to divert, and we're not going to charge the crime, and we'll do a mental health evaluation. They just don't have a regional area to deposit these people. And the reason we have so many folks is because Bartlesville and Nowata and Pawhuska and all those other places, they don't have them, so they find a way to get them down here. That's why, people gravitate to where the resources are. Yeah. No, they gravitate to where the resources are.
So maybe what we can do is, over the course of time, start talking to our legislators about, because it's obviously a funding issue. Now, we've been giving more than 50% of our funds to the State Department of Education.
I gotta take this.
Perhaps that's fine. Thank you, Steve. Perhaps we should have them. Guys, thank you so much for coming out. I hope you come and see us at the fair. We're going to be there September 30th through October the 10th. And then next month on October the 14th, we have Lori Hendricks from Wagner County, and we're going to talk about the perils of the national popular vote. So please join us. Thank you, guys.